They told you Lucifer fell because of pride, because he wanted to be God, because rebellion deserved damnation. But that version is too clean, too convenient, too obedient. It leaves out the questions that refuse to die. Why would the most intelligent being ever created choose a war he could not win? Why would a being described as radiant, wise, and closest to the divine suddenly become irrational? And why do the oldest fragments of the story, buried in forgotten texts and early traditions, describe something far less simple than a jealous angel craving a throne? The story you know was polished, smoothed, made safe. The story you were never told is far more dangerous. Long before Lucifer became a symbol of evil, he had another role. In the oldest Hebrew traditions, the figure later associated with him appears not as a rebel, but as a functionary, a tester, an examiner of human loyalty. In the Book of Job, the Satan is not an enemy of God. He walks freely into the divine court. He speaks with God directly. He receives permission to test Job. He is not outside the system. He is part of it. So how does a servant become the ultimate villain? What changed? The answer does not lie in heaven. It lies in politics, translation, and fear. The name Lucifer itself is a clue. It is not Hebrew. It is Latin. It means light bringer, and it appears in the Vulgate, translation of Isaiah, referring originally to the king of Babylon, mocked as a fallen morning star, a human ruler, not an angel, not a demon, a metaphor for political collapse. But later readers forgot the metaphor. They turned poetry into biography, and slowly, over centuries, a political insult became the origin story of the devil. But the transformation was not accidental. Early Christianity faced a problem, a theological tension. If God was all-powerful and all-good, where did evil come from? Blaming humanity alone was unsatisfying. Blaming God was unacceptable. A third option was needed, a cosmic scapegoat. And so fragments were stitched together. The morning star from Isaiah, the serpent from Genesis, the tester from Job, the dragon from Revelation. Separate symbols written centuries apart, in different contexts, fused into a single personality. Lucifer was constructed, not invented, but assembled. And the assembled figure served a purpose. He became the explanation for everything uncomfortable. Why humans suffer, why temptation exists, why the world is cruel, why God's creation is flawed. All could be attributed to a rebel who defied divine order. But here is the contradiction rarely addressed. In many early traditions, Lucifer's rebellion begins not with a desire to replace God, but with a refusal to bow to humanity. In apocryphal texts like the life of Adam and Eve, angels are commanded to honor Adam, a creature made from dust. Some obey, one does not. He refuses, claiming he was made of fire, superior in nature, unwilling to submit to something lower. This is not the psychology of greed. It is the psychology of protest. He does not want God's throne. He rejects a command he sees as unjust. And suddenly, the story changes shape. This is no longer a tale of ambition. It becomes a tale of dissent, a being punished not for wanting too much, but for questioning hierarchy. And that detail is deeply unsettling because it mirrors human history. Again and again, those who question authority are rarely described as complex. They are described as dangerous, corrupt, evil, enemies of order. Lucifer's narrative becomes a mythological template for how dissent is framed. But the most disturbing part is what happens next. If Lucifer truly rebelled knowing he would lose, then his rebellion was not strategic. It was symbolic, an act of defiance for its own sake, a refusal to comply even when defeat is certain. That is not irrationality. That is conviction. And conviction is far harder to dismiss than arrogance. The Book of Enoch adds another layer. Here, fallen angels descend to earth, teach humans forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, weaponry, cosmetics, astrology. Skills that accelerate civilization and violence. Knowledge becomes sin. Progress becomes corruption. And the fallen are blamed for humanity learning too much, too fast. So Lucifer's legacy becomes associated with enlightenment, with knowledge, with the light that reveals but also destroys innocence. The light bringer is punished for illuminating, which raises an uncomfortable question. Was the crime rebellion or education? Because throughout history, those who bring disruptive knowledge are often branded as threats to order. The parallel is difficult to ignore. By the time medieval theologians like Augustine and later, Milton wrote about Lucifer, the character had evolved again. No longer a bureaucratic tester, no longer a metaphor for Babylon. He was now the tragic, eloquent, almost sympathetic rebel of Paradise Lost. Milton did not intend to glorify him, but readers noticed something. Lucifer had the most compelling voice. He spoke of freedom, of self-determination, of refusing tyranny. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And unintentionally, the villain became the most human character in the story. Not because he was good, but because he was understandable, and that was dangerous. Because if Lucifer could be understood, then rebellion could be understood. And if rebellion could be understood, then authority could be questioned. So later retellings stripped him of nuance, reduced him to a monster, horns, fire, pure malice. Easier to hate, easier to fear, easier to stop asking questions. But the older layers remain, buried beneath centuries of simplification. A servant who tested faith, a metaphor for a fallen king, a dissenter who refused to bow, a teacher of forbidden knowledge, a symbol of pride, a scapegoat for evil. These are not the traits of one coherent being. They are the traits of a story repeatedly reshaped to serve evolving needs. And every reshaping tells us less about Lucifer and more about the societies doing the reshaping. Why did they need him to be evil? Why did they need him to be the enemy? Why did they need a cosmic villain to carry the weight of moral contradictions? Perhaps because it is easier to blame darkness on a fallen angel than to admit it may be built into the structure of creation itself. Or worse, built into us. The final irony is almost poetic. Lucifer, the light bringer, becomes the prince of darkness. The tester becomes the tempter. The dissenter becomes the embodiment of evil. The metaphor becomes a monster. And the transformation happens slowly enough that no one notices, the pieces being stitched together. So the next time you hear that Lucifer fell because of pride, ask yourself a quieter question. What if he fell because the story needed him to? What if history did not record a rebellion in heaven, but a centuries-long human attempt to explain suffering, obedience, knowledge, and fear through a single convenient villain? And what if, hidden inside that villain, is a reflection of humanity's oldest anxiety? Not about evil, but about authority? Because the most frightening possibility is not that Lucifer rebelled, it is that he asked a question, and for that, he had to become